Joining us this morning, the President's top economic advisor, Larry Summers. Dr. Summers, thank you for coming. Let me just start with a basic question. This financial reform bill that's going to be before the Congress, extremely complicated, but it also has far-reaching implications. Let me just ask you this question. If it had been in place in 2007, would it have prevented the financial crisis that we went through in 2008?
I think so. There wouldn't have been unregulated subprime mortgages that predated on people and set off a housing bubble. There would have been a procedure for resolving institutions like Lehman Brothers that got in trouble without big taxpayer bailouts. There wouldn't have been the kind of non-transparent derivatives that we saw at AIG that led to the need for more than $100 billion of bailout. There would have been much less borrowing and leverage that created the house of cards that led to the financial system. So if you look at the things the experts have identified as causes, whether it was the subprime mortgages, whether it was the derivatives, whether it was the concept of too big to fail, they are all addressed by this bill. You know, we passed, going back to the Depression, profoundly important financial regulation legislation. And what happened is the markets evolved. They evolved in all kinds of ways. We saw innovations, the credit card, innovations in mortgages, innovations in many areas. And those innovations had many, many benefits. But our regulatory system didn't catch up with all that innovation. And then you had the things that are as old as time, greed, avarice, irresponsibility, hubris. Without any proper regulation system, that's what led to this crisis, and across the board, that's what this bill addresses.
Well, of course, some of that deregulation came during the Clinton administration when you were part of the Clinton team that deregulated a lot of these things.
You can debate things that went on in the 1990s. I don't believe that the decisions made in the 1990s went to the issues that were important in this crisis, unlike a number of decisions that were made in the post-2000 period, for example, to allow the investment banks to double their level of leverage with no regulation. But, you know, it's much less important to debate and to try to find fault with the past than to put in place a system that will assure that these crises don't happen again. That's what this legislation does in the areas I laid out.
Well, let's debate the future then, because
Great.
Richard Shelby, the ranking Republican on the banking committee, said this morning that he needs some assurances from the White House that no longer will they say that some institutions are too big to fail. He takes the line that these reforms that are being proposed will encourage bailouts rather than end bailouts.
Hardly. Our central objective, the president talked about this during his campaign, the president talked about it in the first months of his presidency. Secretary Geithner, when he laid out our plans, emphasized we must end too big to fail. We do that by providing for death for financial institutions that run themselves into the ground, their systematic liquidation, the wiping out of their equity holders, the removal of their managers. That is central to our vision. Senator Shelby knows that that is something that is crucial to the president. Now, of course, there are going to be debates about the precise mechanisms and how best to do it. But let's be absolutely clear with your listeners. There is no one, certainly no one associated with the White House, who believes that too big to fail is acceptable, who believes that it is acceptable for financial institutions to rely on the prospect of bailout to raise money, and who thinks it's anything other than an absolute imperative to make sure that the days of heads I win, tails the taxpayer lose end. That's why it's such a priority for the president to make sure that the financial institutions bear the cost of what's just taken place. That's why he's proposed a financial fee to assure that the banking and the financial industry bear the cost of what's happened.
But I guess the question that I have is when did you decide that? Because clearly you thought General Motors was too big to fail. You bailed General Motors out. When did you decide these bailouts are not a good thing? I'm not saying they're good or bad. I'm just asking.
Well, let's take General Motors, Bob. Shareholders, 0. Chief executive officer, gone. Senior management team, changed. Bondholders, largely wiped out. Yes, the president did decide, and it took courage because many people opposed it at a moment when the credit markets weren't working, to let General Motors go bankrupt and lend General Motors money. General Motors paid back the loan part of the support this year. The value of General Motors is today much higher than anyone thought likely a year ago. You know, the president took an enormous amount of criticism for what he did. But if you look at what is happening, that support has largely come back. It has largely come back with interest. In some of these areas, the taxpayers are actually earning a profit. And so it is a very different situation than many suggest.
All right. Well,
that it is. There's real accountability in what this president has done, although that's certainly not something we have always had.
Let's talk about the news this morning. Goldman Sachs. In the newspapers this morning, emails that people at Goldman Sachs were basically cheering when it looked like the housing market was going down. One executive emails to another because they had hedged all this, and they were betting against the housing market. One executive email sounds like we will make some serious money, and the person he sends us to responds back, yes, we are well positioned. You've been involved in this kind of thing all your professional life. Dr. Summers, how does it make you feel when you read stories like this? Should Goldman Sachs be in the position, should any of these banks be in the position of they make money when the economy is going down?
Bob, my background is as a professor, not as an employee, not as a full-time Wall Street person. Just to say that at the outset, I'm not going to comment on any specific firm or specific enforcement
well, I'm sure
case. But I will say this: this underscores what is at the center of the president's vision here: the importance of transparency, the importance of things being in the open, the importance of it being known who's in a position to benefit from what, who's got a stake in success, who's got a stake in failure. We need far more transparency. These off-balance sheet, non-transparent vehicles with what people call implicit guarantees invite these kinds of problems, and that's why this reform effort is so very, very important.
All right. Let me also ask you about something else. This week, tomorrow I think it was, the administration was scheduled to roll out its big climate control bill, something that Democrat John Kerry, Independent Joe Lieberman, Republican Lindsey Graham have been working on for months. This is clearly one of the president's priorities. Suddenly they decide, nope, we're going to take up immigration next. Reid decides that he wants to take up the immigration bill. What's going on here? Why Lindsey Graham is so infuriated that he's pulled out of the deal. Here's the one Republican that was really working with the administration on something, and he says you're putting it on a back burner for political reasons.
Bob, I do economics, not politics, but I'll say this. Senator Graham has really been an icon of bipartisan cooperation on two issues, on energy and on immigration, where he's written op-eds, he's cooperated with Democratic senators towards the kind of comprehensive approaches that we need. And we've welcomed that cooperation from Senator Graham. They are both important. There is no either or between energy and immigration reform. Senator Reid, for whatever reasons will in the Senate choose the legislative calendar. Frankly, for our part, what's really overwhelmingly important is that financial reform pass as soon as possible as the next step. But I think there has been, even though immigration reform and energy reform are both crucial issues for the business community, there has been an enormous back pressure against the kind of bipartisan cooperation that Senator Graham has engaged in, and that perhaps has made this a more complex situation and more difficult for him than it would otherwise be. But we are prepared to go ahead vigorously with any partner who wants to join us on both energy reform and immigration legislation, because we think gridlock needs to end.
Well, we're at the end of our little gridlock here, so we'll be back in a minute to talk to Michael Lewis and Tom Friedman. Thank you, Doctor.